The air inside the Democratic caucus room felt heavier than usual, as though the walls themselves were bracing for the impact of unspoken conflict. It wasn't the kind of heaviness that came from exhaustion after long legislative battles, nor the kind that came from budget negotiations stretching into the early hours of the morning. No, this was a different weight altogether, one filled with tension, suspicion, frustration, and months of simmering disagreements. Even the members who usually carried warm smiles or casual small talk avoided eye contact, choosing instead to focus on their phones, their folders, or nothing at all. Representative Jasmine Crockett entered the room quietly, but her presence was impossible to ignore. She walked with the calm confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was and what she stood for, yet the irritation in her eyes suggested she had reached her limit. She took her seat near the back, folding her arms slowly, as if mentally preparing for the battle ahead. Her gaze scanned the room like a silent investigator. She could read the room instantly. People were restless, uneasy, and every glance toward the podium was filled with questions. For weeks, Jasmine had been wrestling with decisions made behind closed doors, decisions that seemed to sideline the voices of those who represented marginalized communities. She had sat quietly in earlier meetings, listening to polished presentations and prepackaged strategies that never quite aligned with what she heard from the people back home. She had watched message discipline evolve into message control, and she had no intention of staying silent any longer. The door swung open again, and the room snapped to attention. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries walked in with the kind of authority that came from years of navigating political storms. His posture was straight, his pace deliberate, his expression firm but unreadable. Advisors trailed behind him with binders, laptops, and printouts dangling from clipboards. The moment he entered, even conversations whispered under breaths came to an instant halt. Members adjusted themselves, straightened their jackets, nudged their papers into neat stacks. Even though this was a closed-door caucus meeting, the weight of hierarchy made itself felt. Jeff exchanged quick nods with a few senior members before moving to the podium. He glanced across the room, absorbing the tension without acknowledging it directly. His eyes flickered, just briefly, toward the back where Crockett sat, but he looked away just as quickly. "Colleagues," Jeff began, his voice deep and steady, "thank you for making the time. Today is important." Jasmine leaned back slightly, already recognizing the tone. It was the tone he used when he wanted to project unity, strength, and control, an authoritative calm meant to dominate the atmosphere. But today, it only fueled the storm building inside her. Jeff launched into his opening remarks. He spoke about the upcoming legislative session, the need for message discipline, the importance of presenting a united front publicly, and the dangers of internal disagreements leaking into the press. He pointed toward charts showing polling data, messaging statistics, and talking point structures. Some members nodded automatically, conditioned by repetition. Others exchanged uneasy glances, but Jasmine didn't move. Her face remained fixed, her eyes unblinking, as though each word was carving itself into her patience and wearing it down. She didn't hate the leader. She respected him. But the strategies he insisted on had started to feel more like restraints than direction. As Jeff continued, she carefully observed how different members reacted. Some were clearly frustrated, but too cautious to show it. Some were genuinely aligned with leadership. And some simply sat there, unsure of where they belonged in the tension rising beneath the surface. When Jeff finally concluded and raised his head from his notes, the room fell into a thick silence. Everyone knew he expected a few polite questions, maybe a suggestion or small clarification, the kind of minimal pushback that leadership could easily manage. But what he got instead was something entirely different. Jasmine rose from her seat with slow, deliberate movements, as though summoning the weight of everything left unspoken. Heads across the room turned instantly. Even those who had been pretending to read their notes looked up, sensing the shift. Jeff blinked once, his expression tightening for the briefest moment. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said with a polite but guarded tone, "you have the floor." Jasmine's voice wasn't raised, but her words carried enough power to silence even the rustle of paper. "Leader Jeff," she began, "with all due respect, We keep being told what the message is. But my question is, whose message is it? Because the communities many of us represent aren't hearing themselves in it. The sentence hit the room like a dropped glass. The murmurs began almost instantly. Some members looked away, others leaned forward. Jeff's jaw tensed ever so slightly, but he maintained his composure. Jasmine continued, her voice steady but sharp. We talk about unity, as if it's the end goal. But unity without representation isn't unity, it's control. That's the truth many of us are struggling with. A ripple of discomfort spread. Jeff placed his hands on the podium, gripping it with silent force. Congresswoman, he began slowly, message discipline isn't about control. It's about preventing fragmentation. Public disagreements. Public disagreements? Jasmine cut in without hesitation. Or public honesty? Another wave of gasps moved through the room. Jeff's eyes narrowed just a fraction, caught between frustration and restraint. He understood political combat. He didn't fear confrontation, but he hadn't expected it to come so directly. Or from someone with this level of presence. Jasmine took a small step forward. We're being told to follow messaging that doesn't reflect the realities our districts face every single day. We're told what we can't say publicly, what we shouldn't challenge. That isn't unity, Leader Jeff. That's obedience. The room held its breath. Some members stared at their shoes, avoiding involvement. Others nodded subtly, grateful that someone was finally saying what they had whispered in private. Jeff inhaled sharply. Congresswoman Crockett, he responded, you know we must maintain cohesion. This is about protecting the caucus. Protecting all of us. Jasmine shook her head. Leadership shouldn't fear pushback from its own members. If you want unity, then include the voices you're asking to stay quiet. Her words settled into the air with unshakable force. And then, unexpectedly, another voice rose. Representative Valdez stood. She had been quiet the entire time, but now she looked directly at Jeff. She's not wrong, Valdez said. Concerns have been raised privately for months. Jeff's eyes shifted toward her, surprised. Then Representative Thompson stood. We're being told to fall in line on issues without real consultation, he said. It's becoming a pattern. Suddenly, this was no longer a clash between Crockett and Jeff. This was something larger. Something deeper. A fracture in the caucus itself. Jeff looked around the room, genuinely startled by the silent wave of agreement spreading from seat to seat. The tension he had hoped to control had instead erupted into full confrontation. But Jasmine didn't soften her tone. She stepped forward again, as if representing not just herself, but every ignored voice in the room. Leader Jeff, she said firmly, we're here because our communities trusted us to speak for them, not to echo talking points. Let us speak. Let us fight. And trust that our voices matter. Jeff's facade finally cracked, not with anger, but with realization. He looked down for a moment, exhaling the pressure he had been holding on to. When he lifted his gaze again, he seemed smaller, more human. All right, he said finally, closing the binder in front of him. The sound of the binder shutting echoed like a symbolic shift. Then let's talk. For real.
No filters.
No pre-written strategy. The room fell utterly silent. Not tense, but transformed. Jasmine nodded once. It wasn't victory, it was acknowledgement. It was the beginning of something different. Behind closed doors, without cameras or reporters, something rare had happened. Not a fight for power. A fight for voice. A fight for representation. A fight for truth. And everyone in that room knew. The caucus would not walk out divided.
They would walk out changed.
The silence that followed Jeff's unexpected concession didn't feel like the silence from earlier, a silence born of pressure, fear, or uncertainty. This silence felt different. It felt like a room cautiously exhaling after holding its breath for far too long. Every member sitting around the long wooden table seemed to shift simultaneously, as if loosening invisible chains. Some exchanged hesitant glances, others looked down, processing what had just taken place. A few looked directly at Jasmine with quiet gratitude. Even those who didn't fully agree with her approach couldn't deny the magnitude of what she had just triggered. Jasmine remained standing, her breathing steady, her expression unreadable. She wasn't triumphant. This wasn't about winning an argument. It was about forcing open a door that had been shut for too long. Her goal was always clarity, not chaos. And now, for the first time in months, there was a chance for a real conversation.
A dangerous one, yes.
A vulnerable one, absolutely. But a necessary one. Jeff stepped away from the podium, walking slowly toward the center of the room. Without the distance created by his elevated position, he looked different. Less like a leader delivering orders, and more like a man confronting the uncomfortable truth that leadership wasn't control, but accountability. His shoulders sagged just slightly, though he tried to hide it. His voice, when he finally spoke again, didn't carry the command it usually did. Instead, it carried something more human. "All right," he said, looking around at the room in a full circle. "Then let's do this properly. If there are concerns, real concerns, then this is the place to put them on the table." For a long moment, no one responded. Members glanced around, unsure who should speak first now that the unspoken rule of silence had been broken. Jasmine watched them carefully. She knew people wanted to speak, they just needed permission. And they needed someone to break the ice. It wasn't Valdez this time, nor Thompson. Instead, it was Representative Hartley, someone who rarely spoke during internal meetings and usually aligned with leadership. The room stiffened in anticipation. Hartley rose slowly, nervously smoothing out the wrinkles in her blazer before she spoke. "Leader Jeff," she said gently, "we all appreciate the work you do. Truly. But many of us have felt for a while that decisions are being made without broader consultation. And the more we try to bring these concerns up privately, the more it feels like they disappear into a void." Jeff blinked, clearly taken aback. Hartley was one of his quiet supporters. If even she was echoing Crockett's concerns, then something deeper was brewing beneath the surface. Hartley continued, growing slightly more confident as she spoke. "I don't think anyone here wants to undermine leadership. We just want to feel included. Many of us represent districts where the stakes are extremely high: social justice, security, education, healthcare disparities. When the messaging doesn't reflect our community's needs, we feel sidelined. And our constituents feel it too." The room hummed with soft agreement. Then Thompson stood again, running a hand through his hair. "I'll speak plainly," he said. "We're being told to support bills we barely had time to read. We're being told which interviews to take and which ones to decline. We're told what phrases to avoid, what topics to sidestep, what criticisms not to voice. It's not leadership, it's micromanagement." Jeff looked visibly stung, though he remained composed. Jasmine studied him closely. This wasn't easy for him. He had worked years to climb into leadership, years defending the caucus, years building trust. To be confronted like this, by allies, by supporters, by newcomers, was a blow to his pride. But pride was exactly what had led to this boiling point. Representative Moore, a seasoned member with decades under her belt, rose slowly. She didn't speak often, but when she did, people listened. "I have seen this caucus through many leadership styles," she began, her voice smooth but firm. "What Congresswoman Crockett is raising is not insubordination. It is accountability. Unity is strong when everyone feels heard. It crumbles when voices are suppressed." A murmur of agreement swept through the room. Moore continued, "We are not soldiers. We are representatives. Our responsibility is not to leadership, it is to our districts. Leadership should guide us, not muzzle us." Jeff exhaled sharply, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Jasmine recognized that gesture. It was his tell. The moment he did that, it meant reality was hitting him harder than he expected. His carefully constructed plans, strategies, and disciplinary rules were being exposed under a harsh light. And the light wasn't coming from political enemies or opponents, it was coming from inside his own house. Jeff finally stepped forward again. "I hear all of you," he said quietly. "And I won't pretend this is easy to listen to. I thought I was making decisions that protected the caucus. I thought coordination meant strength." Jasmine's gaze softened slightly. Not sympathy, but acknowledgement. She understood that leadership was complicated. It was easy to judge from the back row, but carrying the responsibility of an entire caucus, was its own burden. Yet responsibility couldn't justify suffocation. Jeff continued, I didn't realize how many of you felt unheard. If the messaging strategy has become too rigid, then we need to change it. That's clear. But I need you to understand one thing. I wasn't limiting anyone to silence out of control. I was trying to protect you from political attacks, from misquotes, from weaponized soundbites. Jasmine stepped forward slowly, choosing her words with precision. Leader Jeff, with respect, our voices are our strength. Protecting us by limiting us only weakens us. We aren't afraid of backlash. We're afraid of failing the people who trusted us to speak. Those words landed with force. Jeff stared at her for a long moment, something in his expression shifting, perhaps humility, perhaps realization, perhaps something deeper. Then let's fix it, Jeff finally said. Together. No more top-down messaging. No more decisions without input. If we're going to move forward, then everyone in this room needs to be part of the process. The atmosphere changed instantly. Shoulders relaxed. Members leaned forward. For the first time in months, the room didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like a table. A table where decisions could be shaped, where voices could be heard, where differences didn't have to be buried beneath polish and discipline. Jasmine took her seat again, but her presence still radiated strength. She wasn't done, not by a long shot. She had opened the door, but now the real work would begin. A room full of politicians wasn't easy to unify without silencing disagreement. But she wasn't trying to unify them through silence. She wanted unity through truth, even when truth was messy. Representative Khalid, one of the youngest members in the room, raised his hand timidly. I think we also need to talk about how leadership handles media relations, he said. Sometimes interviews are coordinated in a way that favors certain members over others. It alienates us. Jeff nodded slowly. We can revisit that, he said. I admit, some strategic decisions have unintentionally sidelined people. Another member spoke. Then another. Then another. What started as a confrontation had turned into a forum. Raw, honest, emotional, and overdue. For nearly an hour, members voiced their frustrations. They spoke about policy concerns, district struggles, the pressures of being public figures, the burnout from constant political maneuvering, the fear of losing touch with their communities. Some stories were personal. Some were painful. Some were infuriating to hear. And for the first time, Jeff listened. Really listened. Without interrupting, without defending, without speaking over anyone. He simply absorbed it all, taking mental notes, letting the weight of their words sink in. Jasmine watched him closely. Leadership wasn't about knowing everything, it was about being willing to learn. Once the flood of concerns began to settle, Jeff stood once more. Thank you, he said quietly. All of you. I can't promise instant change, but I can promise transparency. I can promise collaboration. And I can promise that going forward, we do this as a team, not a hierarchy. The room slowly nodded. Not every concern was solved. Not every frustration was gone. But a foundation had been laid. And that was more than anyone had expected when they walked into that room. But Jasmine wasn't fully satisfied yet. She leaned forward, folding her hands together. Leader Jeff, she said, it's not just about internal decisions. It's also about how we show up publicly. Our voices matter. Not just in strategy rooms, but in front of the country. Jeff nodded. You're right, he said. And we'll build a new approach to that, too. What came next would be even more difficult but necessary.